This photo looks ordinary, but it hides a dark secret that has troubled restorers. Dr. Maya Wilson carefully removed her latex gloves as the high-resolution scanner hummed to a stop. The photograph, a faded sepia-toned image from 1863, had been discovered last month in a hidden compartment beneath the floorboards of an old Savannah mansion. As head conservator at the National Museum of African American History, Maya had received dozens of historical photographs, but something about this one felt different. "How's the scan coming along?" asked her colleague, Dr. James Peterson, entering the lab with 2 coffees. "Just finished. Let's take a look," Maya replied, turning to her monitor as the image appeared in stunning digital clarity. The photograph showed a cotton plantation in Georgia during the Civil War. A dozen enslaved workers stood in a line, their expressions unreadable, with a white overseer at the edge of the frame. The plantation house loomed in the background, its columned facade a stark contrast to the barren worker cabins visible at the image's edge. Maya zoomed in methodically, section by section, examining the details. When she reached the bottom corner, she suddenly froze. "James," she called, her voice tight, "look at this." In the bottom right corner, partially obscured by dirt and what appeared to be deliberate scratching on the original, lay something the photographer had captured but someone had later tried to erase. Small chains, partially buried in the soil, and emerging from the ground, what was unmistakably a child's hand. "My God," James whispered. "Is that what I think it is?" Maya nodded grimly. "Someone tried to remove this detail from the photograph. If we hadn't scanned at this resolution, we might never have seen it." She checked the photograph's documentation again. It had been found alongside a journal and letters belonging to a northern photographer named Edward Hayes, who had traveled through the South during the Civil War. "This wasn't just a documentation of plantation life," Maya said quietly. "It's evidence of a crime." The haunting image of that small hand would lead them into a dark history that some had desperately tried to bury, and others had risked everything to expose. By morning, Maya had barely slept. The image of the child's hand haunted her. The museum director had been called, and the photograph was now secured in their highest protection archive. "I've been through Hayes's journal," James said, setting down a leather-bound book protected by a clear preservation sleeve. "Listen to this entry from April 18th, 1863. Documented Clayton Plantation today under guise of creating promotional materials. The owner, William Clayton, proud of his operation despite the war at his doorstep. What he doesn't know is that my lens captures what they wish to hide." Maya leaned forward. "He was deliberately documenting atrocities. Hayes was working as a spy of sorts," James continued, "officially hired by plantation owners to create flattering images, but secretly documenting the realities of slavery for abolitionist publications in the North." Maya carefully examined the original photograph again. The scratching over the corner was clearly intentional. Someone had tried to eliminate the evidence. "There's more," James said, turning pages. 2 days later, the incident with the child Samuel weighs heavily. Clayton claims it was fever, but the other workers' faces tell the truth. I positioned them so the burial site would be visible at the frame's edge. The overseer noticed my composition and seemed suspicious. Maya felt a chill. Samuel, the child, had a name. Further reading of Hayes's journal revealed he had fled the plantation shortly after taking the photograph, fearing his true purpose had been discovered. He'd smuggled his negatives and journals north through Union lines. "He was risking his life," Maya said, "not just as a northerner behind Confederate lines, but as someone documenting war crimes." The final entry about Clayton Plantation read, "Image sent to Harper's via courier. Editor promises discreet handling of most damning details. Pray it opens northern eyes to the reality behind Confederate claims of their peculiar institutions benevolent." Maya turned to her computer, searching historical archives of Harper's Weekly from 1863. There it was. A woodcut illustration based on Hayes's photograph, but with a critical difference. The corner with Samuel's burial had been completely removed. "Even the abolitionists censored it," she whispered. The full truth was too disturbing even for those fighting against slavery. The question remained, what exactly had happened to Samuel, and who had tried to erase him from history? Maya and James split up the research tasks. While James investigated Edward Hayes's background and connections to abolitionist networks, Maya focused on identifying the Clayton Plantation and finding records of a child named Samuel. In the Georgia Historical Society archives, she discovered that Clayton Plantation had been one of the largest cotton producers in Chatham County, owned by William Clayton, a third-generation plantation owner and Confederate supporter. Property records from 1860 list 86 enslaved people, Maya noted, photographing the documents, ages ranging from infant to elderly. She scanned the inventory carefully, page by page, until she found it. Male child, Samuel, age 9, value $800. The clinical assessment of a child's monetary worth made Maya's stomach turn, but she pressed on. Clayton's meticulous records included a section on property loss, documenting enslaved people who had died, escaped, or been sold. An entry from April 1863 simply stated, "Boy Samuel, deceased. Cause, punishment exceeded. Overseer Jackson reprimanded for damage to property." "Punishment exceeded," Maya whispered, feeling a cold anger build inside her. The plantation records had recorded a murder as nothing more than damaged property. Further digging uncovered a letter from Clayton to a fellow plantation owner. Had trouble with Jackson again. His methods, while effective for maintaining order, occasionally result in regrettable loss. Most recent incident involved a boy caught teaching others his letters. Someone had clearly corrupted him with dangerous ideas. Jackson's correction was unfortunately terminal. Maya sat back, momentarily overwhelmed. Samuel had been killed for trying to read or teach others. Most revealing was a local church record noting, burial conducted at Clayton Plantation for slave child. Master declined Christian ceremony. Reverend Phillips conducted brief prayers at unmarked site near North Cotton Field at Widow Clayton's private request. The pieces were coming together. Samuel had been learning to read, forbidden for enslaved people in Georgia, under penalties including whipping or mutilation. He had been caught, potentially teaching others, and the overseer's punishment had killed him. He'd been buried in an unmarked grave near the cotton fields, visible in Hayes's photograph. The photographer had deliberately positioned his shot to include this evidence, risking his own safety to document a crime that otherwise would have gone unrecorded except as a business loss. But who had tried to scratch out this evidence from the photograph, and why? James burst into the lab the following morning, his eyes bright with discovery. "I found Hayes's daughter's papers in a small historical society in Massachusetts," he announced, including letters he sent her with his photographs before publication. He laid out scanned copies of the correspondence. Hayes sent the original photograph of Clayton Plantation to his daughter for safekeeping, worried his rooms might be searched. He explained all the details, including Samuel's story. "So how did it end up hidden in a Savannah house?" Maya asked. "That's where it gets interesting," James replied. After the war, Hayes's daughter married a Union officer who was stationed in Georgia during Reconstruction. They lived in Savannah for several years. The photograph and journals must have traveled with them. Maya examined the new documents carefully. One letter from Hayes to his daughter stood out. "The Clayton image must be protected at all costs. It is evidence not just of the horrors of slavery, but of a specific crime the authorities refuse to acknowledge. The boy, Samuel, deserves justice, even if only in history's judgment." Their research took an unexpected turn when they discovered that the house where the photograph had been found had once belonged to Richard Jackson, the same overseer mentioned in Clayton's records. After the war, Jackson somehow acquired enough money to buy a modest house in Savannah, James explained. He died there in 1875. "And the photograph was found hidden in that house," Maya said slowly, "which means Jackson somehow got hold of it," James finished, "and tried to destroy the evidence." A newspaper clipping from 1866 provided the missing link. Former overseer R. Jackson accuses Northern photographer of slander through manipulated images. Case dismissed for lack of evidence. Hayes publicly exposed him, Maya realized. Jackson must have learned about the photograph, or tracked down a copy, and tried to destroy the evidence of his crime. The scratches over Samuel's hand suddenly took on new meaning. They weren't just an attempt to erase history, but a desperate act to escape accountability by a man who had murdered a child and feared post-war justice. But he didn't destroy it completely, Maya said. He hid it instead. Perhaps he kept it as insurance, James suggested, or couldn't bring himself to destroy it entirely. Either way, it remained hidden until now. After more than 160 years, Maya said softly, Samuel's hand is reaching out from the past, demanding to be seen. Maya presented their findings to the museum's board, which unanimously approved funding for an expanded research project. The story of Samuel and the Hayes photograph had captured their attention, not just as historical documentation, but as evidence of both atrocity and resistance, the overseer's violence and the photographer's determination to expose it. "Our next step should be trying to identify Samuel's family," Maya explained, "both his descendants and the Clayton families. This photograph connects them through a shared, if painful, history. Genealogical research into enslaved people's families presented enormous challenges. Records were sparse, names were changed, and families were deliberately separated. But the Clayton plantation records provided an important starting point. Samuel's mother is listed as Woman Ruth, age 32, James noted from the plantation inventory. And there's a younger sister, Girl Grace, age 4. Post-Civil War records showed Ruth and Grace had survived into freedom. The Freedmen's Bureau documents listed them living in a community of formerly enslaved people near Savannah in 1866. Ruth had taken the surname Freeman for herself and her daughter, a common choice symbolizing their new status. Further research through census records, church documents, and land deeds allowed them to trace Ruth Freeman's descendants to the present day. After 3 weeks of careful work, Maya found herself looking at the contact information for Dr. Leah Freeman, a history professor at Howard University and Samuel's great-grandniece. "Should we contact her immediately?" James asked. Maya hesitated. "Let's complete the circle first. We should also find Clayton's descendants." The Clayton family proved easier to trace through well-preserved records of wealthy white families. William Clayton had lost most of his wealth after the war, but had maintained social standing. His great-grandson, Michael Clayton, was a retired attorney living in Atlanta. Maya drafted careful emails to both Dr. Freeman and Michael Clayton explaining their discovery in measured academic terms. Within hours, her phone rang. Dr. Freeman calling from Washington, D.C. "You found a photograph of my family?" Her voice was controlled but intense. From before emancipation? Yes, Maya answered carefully, and evidence of a story that wasn't fully documented in official records. Taz, after a long pause, Dr. Freeman said, I'm coming to see it tomorrow. My family has been searching for connections to our enslaved ancestors for generations. Whatever you found, we need to see it. The Clayton response came the following morning, a brief, formal email accepting the invitation to view the materials, but expressing reservations about revisiting potentially distorted historical narratives. Both families would be arriving at the museum within days, bringing together descendants from opposite sides of America's great historical wound, connected by a photographer's hidden evidence and a child's unburied truth. The museum's conservation lab had been transformed for the meeting. The original photograph sat in a protective case under proper lighting, with the high-resolution scan displayed on a large monitor. Hayes's journal lay nearby, along with the plantation records and other documentation they'd gathered. Dr. Leah Freeman arrived first, a tall woman in her 50s with a dignified bearing and intense eyes. As a historian herself, she understood the protocols of archival research, but when Maya showed her the photograph, her professional demeanor briefly cracked. That's my family, she whispered, leaning closer to the image. Those are my people. Maya gently directed her attention to the corner of the photograph, explaining what they had discovered. Dr. Freeman listened in silence, her expression shifting from academic interest to deep pain. Samuel was my great-grandmother Grace's brother, she said finally. His death was part of our family's oral history, a brother who died before freedom came. But we never knew details, only that he was punished for being clever. Now I'm looking at evidence of his murder. Michael Clayton arrived 30 minutes later, a hesitant man in his 60s who seemed uncomfortable from the moment he entered. He nodded stiffly to Dr. Freeman before turning his attention to Maya. I want to make it clear that I cannot be held accountable for actions taken by ancestors 6 generations removed, he stated. No one is suggesting otherwise, Mr. Clayton, Maya assured him. We're presenting historical evidence that connects both your families, which we believe has educational and historical value. As Maya explained their findings, Mr. Clayton's discomfort visibly grew. When she showed the enhanced corner of the photograph with Samuel's hand, he looked away. This is exactly the kind of sensationalism I was concerned about, he muttered. Sensationalism? Dr. Freeman's voice was quiet but sharp. A child was killed and buried without ceremony. Your ancestor recorded it as a property loss and reprimanded the overseer for damage rather than murder. Edward Hayes risked his safety to document it, and you're concerned about your family's reputation? The tension in the room was palpable until James gently intervened. Perhaps we should review Hayes' own words about why he took such risks to create this documentation. He read from the journal, I do not document these horrors to condemn individuals, but to expose a system that corrupts both master and enslaved. Future generations must see the truth to ensure such systems never return. After a long silence, Mr. Clayton spoke again, his voice less defensive. My grandmother told stories about William Clayton. She described him as a product of his time who treated his people well. I grew up believing that. Many families constructed such narratives after the war, Maya explained, but primary sources like this photograph tell a more complex and often painful story. Dr. Freeman turned to Mr. Clayton. My family kept Samuel's memory alive for generations, without knowing exactly what happened to him. Your family tried to forget. We're both carrying pieces of the same history. Mr. Clayton didn't respond immediately, but he no longer avoided looking at the photograph. The uncomfortable first meeting had laid groundwork for a difficult but necessary conversation about shared history and different perspectives, exactly what Edward Hayes had hoped his photography would someday inspire. The following day, Maya received an unexpected email from a historical society in Boston. A curator there had read about their discovery in a museum newsletter and recognized Edward Hayes' name. We may have additional Hayes photographs from his Civil War documentation, the email read, including what appears to be more images from Georgia plantations. Within a week, Maya was in Boston examining a recently discovered collection of Hayes' work. Most were conventional portraits and landscapes, but a folder marked Southern Documentation contained 24 photographs similar to the Clayton plantation image, each seemingly innocent at first glance, but containing carefully positioned evidence of slavery's brutality. One showed a plantation hospital with instruments of punishment visible in the background. Another captured a slave auction in progress, the photographer's angle emphasizing a mother's desperate expression as she clutched a child who would likely be sold separately. Hayes was creating a systematic visual record, Maya explained to James upon her return. Not just random documentation, but a deliberate visual indictment. Most revealing was a letter they found in the Boston collection, written by Hayes to an abolitionist publisher who had rejected his most graphic images. You suggest these images are too disturbing for Northern audiences. I respectfully disagree. The peculiar evil of slavery lies partly in its invisibility to those not directly involved. These photographs make visible what slave owners hide behind grand houses and genteel manners. If we shield Northern eyes from uncomfortable truths, we become complicit in slavery's greatest lie, that it can exist without daily violence and dehumanization. Maya and James now understood why Hayes had positioned his camera to capture Samuel's burial site, why he had sent his daughter the unaltered original, and why the overseer had later tried to destroy it. The photograph was both evidence and accusation, a silent witness that could speak across time. Hayes understood photography's power, Maya said. He knew these images would outlive him and continue telling truths long after everyone involved had died. They invited Dr. Freeman and Mr. Clayton back to the museum to view the expanded collection. Dr. Freeman immediately accepted. Mr. Clayton's response came a day later, a brief message saying he would attend and was still processing our previous meeting. Or what had begun as a conservation project was evolving into something more significant, a chance to use Hayes' visual evidence to bridge different historical narratives and confront difficult truths that connected living people through their ancestors' experiences. The photographer's mission, interrupted by history, was finally continuing. 2 months after discovering the photograph, Maya sat in the museum director's office discussing plans for a potential exhibition. Hayes' work deserves wider recognition, Maya argued. Not just the Clayton plantation photograph, but all the documentation we found. It's a unique visual record of slavery created specifically to bear witness. The director nodded thoughtfully. I agree about its historical significance, but we need to consider sensitivity concerns. The image of Samuel's burial is particularly disturbing. Truth often is, Maya replied. Hayes didn't look away, and neither should we. They decided to form an advisory committee that included both historians and descendants. Dr. Freeman immediately agreed to participate. To Maya's surprise, Michael Clayton also accepted the invitation after some hesitation. At the first advisory meeting, opinions varied dramatically about how, or whether, to display the more graphic images. These photographs show the reality my ancestors endured, Dr. Freeman stated firmly, sanitizing that history dishonors their experience. A museum trustee countered, we must consider our diverse audience, including school groups and families. Context is essential. Mr. Clayton had remained silent until directly asked for his opinion. A month ago, I would have advocated for keeping these images private, he said slowly. I was concerned about how my family would be portrayed. But I've been thinking about Hayes' purpose in creating these photographs. He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. He wasn't trying to shame individuals, but to expose a system. My ancestor was part of that system, as was the overseer, Jackson. Hiding these images now would continue what Jackson tried to do when he scratched out Samuel's hand from the photograph. The room fell silent at this unexpected perspective. I believe we should show the truth, Mr. Clayton continued, with proper historical context that acknowledges the complexity of the period without excusing its fundamental injustice. This intervention shifted the conversation. The committee eventually reached consensus on an exhibition approach that would present Hayes' work as both historical evidence and an early example of photography as moral witness. Most significantly, they agreed that the central focus would be not just on slavery's brutality, but on Hayes' choice to document it and the subsequent efforts to either preserve or erase that documentation. The competing impulses to remember or forget difficult history that continued into the present. The exhibition would be titled Uncovering Evidence, Edward Hayes and the Photography of Witness, with a Clayton plantation photograph, and Samuel's story serving as its emotional and intellectual center. As the meeting concluded, Dr. Freeman approached Mr. Clayton. Thank you for your support, she said simply. He nodded, still uncomfortable, but no longer avoiding the conversation. My family's history isn't what I thought it was. I'm still coming to terms with that. History is rarely what we're first taught, she replied, but facing it honestly is the only way forward. As exhibition preparations progressed, a new question emerged. Could Samuel's actual burial site be located? The photograph showed its approximate location on the former Clayton plantation, but the exact spot remained unknown. The land is now part of a public park, James reported. The plantation house was destroyed during Sherman's march to the sea, and the property changed hands multiple times after the war. Using Hayes' photograph, historical maps, and modern geographical analysis, they identified a likely area within the park. After securing necessary permissions, a team including Maya, Dr. Freeman, and, somewhat surprisingly, Michael Clayton traveled to Georgia to investigate. The former plantation was now a scenic park with walking trails and picnic areas, its violent history invisible to casual visitors. Following their research coordinates, they walked to an unremarkable section near the park's edge, where old oak trees provided shade. According to our analysis, Samuel would have been buried somewhere in this vicinity, Maya explained, consulting her tablet with overlaid historical and modern maps. Dr. Freeman stood silently, absorbing the peaceful setting that had once been a place of bondage where her ancestor had died. Mr. Clayton hung back, visibly uncomfortable to be standing on land his family had once owned and where their actions had caused such suffering. The team had brought ground-penetrating radar equipment to search for evidence of unmarked graves. As the technicians set up the equipment, Dr. Freeman walked to the base of the largest oak tree and placed her hand against its bark. This tree would have been here then, she said softly. It witnessed everything. The radar survey took several hours, revealing multiple anomalies consistent with unmarked graves, not just one, but an entire unmapped burial ground for enslaved people. There could be dozens of people buried here, the technician explained, all unmarked and unrecorded. Dr. Freeman nodded, unsurprised. Our family stories mentioned others who never had proper burials. This wasn't just Samuel. As the team packed up their equipment, Mr. Clayton approached Dr. Freeman. "I'd like to help establish a proper memorial here," he said hesitantly. "Not to ease my conscience, but because it's right. These people deserve to be acknowledged." Dr. Freeman studied him for a moment before responding. "A memorial would be appropriate, but it should be part of a larger effort to educate people about this site's true history." "I agree," he said. "Perhaps something that incorporates Hayes's photographs and tells Samuel's story specifically, along with acknowledging the others buried here." As they walked back to their vehicles, Maya observed the tentative connection forming between these descendants from opposite sides of history. Not friendship exactly, but a shared commitment to truth that transcended their ancestors' unequal relationship. The discovery of the burial ground added another dimension to the exhibition plans. Now, Hayes's photograph could be linked to a physical place visitors could experience, creating a tangible connection between historical documentation and present-day landscape, between photographic evidence and the earth that held its subjects. 6 months later, Maya stood in the center of the completed exhibition, watching the first visitors move through the carefully designed space. Uncovering evidence, Edward Hayes and the photography of Witness had opened to significant media attention, with the Clayton Plantation photograph and Samuel's story at its heart. The exhibition began with Hayes's early career, explaining his transformation from conventional photographer to documentary witness. It continued through his dangerous Civil War documentation project, featuring 24 of his strategic photographs with detailed explanations of what each subtly revealed about slavery's realities. In the central gallery, the Clayton Plantation photograph was displayed in 3 forms. The original, with its scratched corner, a high-resolution scan revealing Samuel's hand, and a large interactive display, allowing visitors to see how Hayes had positioned his camera to include evidence of wrongdoing while appearing to create an ordinary plantation record. Nearby, a video played showing the ground-penetrating radar survey and the memorial now established at the burial site, a simple stone marker acknowledging the unnamed enslaved people buried there, with Samuel identified by name as a representative of all those whose stories remained largely untold. Most powerful was the final gallery, where visitors encountered a joint statement from Dr. Leah Freeman and Michael Clayton, displayed alongside their family photographs. "We stand on opposite sides of a historical divide, one descended from the enslaved, one from enslavers. The photograph that connects our families documents both suffering and the attempt to expose truth. We cannot change our shared past, but we can choose how honestly we face it and what lessons we carry forward." Dr. Freeman moved through the exhibition, occasionally stopping to answer questions from visitors or media. Mr. Clayton had attended the opening reception, but chosen not to remain for the public opening, still processing his complicated relationship with his family's history. At the exhibition's conclusion, a book of reflection invited visitors to share their thoughts. Maya paused to read some of the early entries. "Never understood how photography could be an act of courage until today. Makes me wonder what injustices are being documented now that future generations will uncover. As a photographer myself, Hayes's work reminds me that where I point my camera is a moral choice. And most simply, Samuel is remembered." As the museum closed for the evening, Maya found Dr. Freeman standing before the central photograph, studying it intently. "What are you thinking?" Maya asked gently. "About Samuel's hand," Dr. Freeman replied. "Someone tried to erase it from the photograph, just as they tried to erase him from history. But here it is, still reaching out across time." Maya nodded. Hayes would be gratified to know his work finally achieved what he intended. "Not just Hayes," Dr. Freeman said. "Samuel, too. Whatever he was teaching other children, however he was resisting," it continues, "his hand is still raised, still teaching us something important." The photograph that had begun as disturbing evidence had transformed into something more profound, a bridge between past and present, a connection between divided families, and a reminder that documentation could be an act of justice that outlived both victims and perpetrators. Through careful restoration, historical research, and the courage to face difficult truths, Samuel's nearly erased hand had become visible again, not just as evidence of historical crime, but as a gesture reaching toward a more honest future.